I now call the meeting to order. Our topic today is the PTSS, the Public Transport Strategic Study, and the meeting will last until 12:45. And if there is a need, we will see if we need to extend the meeting. And we have a total of 57 deputations and individuals coming to meet with us to express their views on the PTSS, non-franchise buses. And there are 3 deputations and individuals who have submitted written submissions without coming to the meeting. There are 2 parts to today's meeting, and the first part will last until 11. There will be 30 deputations and individuals speaking to us, and there will be a break of 10 minutes. And then in the second part, that would last until 12:55, and there will be 27 deputations and individuals speaking to us during the second part. And after the deputations and individuals have spoken, the floor will be open to members. But then if there are too many members who would like to speak in the first session, I'll have to cut them short and then ask them to speak again in the second session, or else we will not be able to have that break. Well, the administration team has just joined us. Welcome to you. Let's now invite the deputations to come and join us. First of all, let me introduce the government officials. We have the Undersecretary, Mr. Yao Sing Mu, and Ms. Carrie Chang, Ms. Cindy Law, and Mr. Andy Chen, as well as Mr. Vincent Feng, and they are either from the Transport Department or from the Transport and Housing Bureau. Let me remind members of the public and the deputations that, well, for those attending any meetings in the electrical complex, we have a set of guidelines on security measures, and this set of guidelines have been attached to the letter given by the Secretariat to all deputations and individuals. And you've also got a copy in front of you. And you can also tune into the relevant channel. Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 English, and Channel 3 Putonghua. I'd like to remind the deputations here, while expressing your views, you will not be protected by the Electrical Powers and Privileges Ordinance in terms of safeguards and exemptions. But then your written submissions would also not be covered by that ordinance. May I invite you to be as brief and concise as possible. You'll be given 3 minutes, and then as soon as the time's up, I'll have to cut you short, because there are many deputations here, and I'm sure there are members who would also like to ask questions. And first of all, I'd like to invite the administration to give a 5-minute introductory statement. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for inviting us to come to the panel meeting today. Well, on the 25th of November last year, we have already briefed members on the PTSS plan. In simple terms, the public transport strategy study will be divided into two parts. First is about the role and positioning review. That is to review the different modals view, and the second part would be a topical study. So we would be looking at issues which are of concern to the transport sector, and the two would be interrelated and interactive. And the purpose is to enhance the complementary role between different modes of transport in order to ensure that while there is diversified choice, the sector as a whole would also be able to develop healthily in a sustainable manner. And the purpose of today's meeting is to meet with deputations so they can give us their views on the RPR with regard to non-franchise bus services. Concerning non-franchise bus services, the RPR would be looking at the role to be played by NFB. At present, we have about 7,000 NFBs in Hong Kong providing different types of service comprising hotel service, tour service, student service, employee service, international passenger service, resident service, and contract hire service. So there are different types of service being provided by NFBs. As far as public transport is concerned, and NFBs have played a very important role, but then their fares are not subject to any control, and therefore they can be very flexible in order to meet the needs of the community. The overall operation has been rather smooth. Other than school buses, for other types of NFBs, supply and demand, that has been pretty stable. But then given the fact that with new infrastructure coming into play, and in order to ensure that there will be healthy development, so under the RPR, we will be looking into whether or not we will need to increase the flexibility on NFB operation as appropriate to meet new service demand. And the purpose of today's hearing is to look at the RPR of NFB, but I'd like to take the opportunity to say a few words on the school service, school bus service, which has been a concern to many sectors. In fact, there has been a problem, and as a result, many parents and students have difficulty identifying such service. So, under the topical study of the PTAS, we'll be looking into that in depth. On Friday this week, that is on the 17th of April, with regard to the supply of school bus service, and also in September 2015, with the start of the school term, we will also be consulting the TAC, and we have already provided a paper to the transport panel, and we'll be listening to the deputations' comments on school bus services, and that will also be passed on to the transport and education sectors working group, so that it will be able to look into this further. I understand that the working group already had a meeting yesterday, and in passing, I'd like to say that in terms of government internal resources, under the RPR, we will require additional manpower. We will also have to create posts to cater for the needs, and that has been supported by the ESC. And later this week, on Friday, we'll be submitting that proposal to the FC for approval. I call upon members to support that proposal, so that we can create the post in order to start the work on RPR. Thank you. All right, it's 9:15, and we have 30 deputations and individuals, and by giving each of you 3 minutes, we will last until 10. We will last past 10, and we will have to have a 10-minute break. So I'll only be able to give 15 minutes to members for asking questions. So we can only have up to 5 members asking questions, and if there are more, we will have to wait until the second session. First, Mr. Lam Chan Yun, Motor Transport Workers General Union Non-Franchise Bus Branch. Yes, I'm representing the non-franchise bus branch, and earlier on, the administration introduced the environmental protection or green subsidy. As a result, many drivers and owners have replaced their vehicles in order to support the administration's initiative. Given the fact that there is high cost and low profit, we have been operating under the circumstances, and now the administration is introducing this new challenge of AO3R. We are very puzzled, because how can we face up to this new environment? And if the administration indeed wants to offer another bait for us to replace our vehicles, then for this group of drivers, they are faced with this ever-changing administration, and they'll find it difficult to survive. And therefore, we hope that for the workers and also the nannies as well as the drivers, they are rather old. And therefore, once you introduce this 803R initiative, in terms of the types of vehicles and also the number of passengers on board, there will be more. So for the drivers and also the nannies, will they be able to cater for that? So as a result of that, some drivers may find it difficult to hang on with their jobs. And at present, for the pay of these drivers and nannies is relatively low because of the working hours and also the workload is not that heavy. So for elderly drivers, well, they are able to take up the job because in terms of the physique, they might not be able to cope with jobs with a heavier workload. And if the administration were to introduce this 803R, please do take into account the new 16-seater buses. How can they continue with their operation? And if we are not able to continue with our jobs, then the future operation might be monopolized by some large corporations. So is it possible for them to charge a lower fares than what we are charging now? So please do take it into account. Thank you. Next. Thank you, Chairman. Since the era of C.H. Tong and from Hong Kong to Beijing, we've been saying this time and again. Well, Hong Kong should learn from Singapore. That's why, if you look at my submission, I've also cited examples from Singapore. That's not because of my surname appearing to be someone from Singapore, because I think we just like to learn from overseas experience, and I understand that the panel has been to Singapore. That's why there is no reason why I would not cite examples from Singapore. Apparently, we've been told that the application procedures for licenses would be very complicated, but then if you look at Singapore, I can fully share the sentiments of the trade. I support them. That's because, well, if you look at the number of the types of licenses in Hong Kong, well, for license A and license B, in total there are 12, but then in Singapore they only have 4, and that can cover all the 12 trades or 12 types. So should the administration listen to the state leaders' views, so that we can learn from Singapore, so that you can adopt the Singaporean approach in dealing with the types of passenger service license. In particular, if it's about school buses, and if you look at the experience in Singapore, I agree that for the 6,800 vehicles, they should indeed be issued with an A03R endorsement. But then in Singapore, if you want to buy a vehicle, other than having to apply for a license for a private bus, you also have to have the ownership license. And in Singapore, if you have the ownership license, then you can speculate on vehicles. But then I don't understand why. All right, for Checker 374, Cap 374, Section 27 says that for such licenses, they are not supposed to be transferred. But then why do we have this speculation problem? Probably they will have to rely on speculation in order to make a profit. But then Mr. Yao and also the officials on the other side, I'd like to remind you that there is a form, PD 586A, by the Transport Department, and I think there is something strange in that pro forma. So the administration will have to take it more seriously. Also, I've noticed that Mr. Yao, you have not brought with you another guy, and that is the Vehicle Safety Standard Unit's colleagues, because in the process of procuring a vehicle, in fact, when it comes to vehicle examination, there are many problems.
For axle weight exceeding 11 tons, exemption would have to be sought. So this is really strange. I wonder if the government is really having so much spare time to deal with that. Next.
Thank you,
Thank you, Chairman. According to the Transport Department's information, as of the end of 2014, there were 7,000 plus registered non-franchise public buses in the territory. As for passenger trips daily, there were 140,000. So the DAB has 4 suggestions on the relevant policy. First of all, the government should have a timely review on the policy. There was a regulatory framework licensing system review of non-franchise bus operation, and it was done 12 years ago, and the government should review the positioning and the role of NFBs and to list the NFB in their transport study as well. According to the data in 2013, in relation to parking spaces for coaches, there are only some 5,000 for coaches, while there are 7,000 for franchise buses. So it's far from sufficient. And as for loading and unloading of passengers on the road, without affecting other road users, and in light of road safety, there should be more laybys with time restrictions to designate loading and unloading areas for coaches to enhance safety. Thirdly, school bus services should be enhanced. We suggest that the department hold regular meetings with the transport sector and schools to enhance school bus services. Also, the government could consider adjusting the school hours for kindergartens and primary schools so that school buses could serve various schools in the same school district to reduce the number of coaches. Fourthly, we should combat illegal NFBs because when road accidents happen, there will not be any insurance coverage. So the government should step up enforcement by more frequent inspections to combat illegal coaches. Lastly, the government should also communicate with the district councils to ensure reasonable service for different districts. Next. We are from China, Hong Kong, and Macau Boundary Crossing Bus Association on the supply of NFB services. We took part in a joint meeting with the education sector, and I want to talk about the problem. The tendering process and high fares, these are the major problems. First of all, at the meeting, we posted 3 advertisements, and we also received cases referred by the education sector, and 24 schools are involved. 24 operators are involved, and for 10 of them, they have tendering process that accounts for 1.54% of the total number of schools, so that the problem is within 1 to 2%. Secondly, we see that according to statistics, 42% of the schools are not sure how many school students there are, because even in the surveys, there is no mentioning of the number of school students, so there is no way for tenderers to assess the cost involved. As for student intake in the coming school year, there is no mentioning either. And according to my own survey, for the whole school, well, it say in a school, if there are less than 50 students taking school bus, there are 64% of them. For 50 to 100 students, 21%, 101 to 150 students, 14%, and 0% for over 151 students. So the school bus problem has to do with insufficient student intake, and according to the government's policy, as long as there is sufficient student intake, there is no need to close down the school. And that is why schools would like to have school bus services. And we see from the cases received, there are schools which do not have sufficient student intake, and they are in various school nets across territory. And it has not only to do with school bus operators, because for school bus operators, they find it hard to estimate the costs in submitting their tender bids. And this will only cause smaller operators to close down. If we do not have a cap in that pilot scheme, then only large operators will have the advantage. For smaller operators with few coaches, they will not be able to absorb the shock. And a lot of small operators will have to close down, and oligopoly will be created. Sorry, your time is up. I've given you some extra seconds because some other deputations have not arrived. Next, Liberal Party's representative, Mr. Mark Fu. Thank you, Chairman. Today we're talking about NFBs, non-franchised buses. I think a lot of concerns have to do with school buses, but I'll talk about the NFBs in general. There was a lack of regulation, and earlier on there have been cases of illegal operations, and because of the department's operation, the sector finds it hard to survive. For example, in relation to the bus routes, fares, etc. They're all fixed, and if in the event of accidents, it is impossible for buses to make flexible deployments, and lost trips would also cause grievances amongst passengers, and that's for Western's bus services. And it is suggested that licenses will be issued in one go, but I think the government departments has failed to understand that cost is a major consideration. According to our study, it costs about 50,000 per month for a coach to provide school bus services. And let's say it has a passenger load of 60, and during holidays like Christmas, New Year, you can't provide school service, and you also need to consider market demand. Most parents would not like to have their children sit through a long journey and be the last to get off the school bus. Well, I also use the school bus service, but times have changed. You can see that the ridership has continued to drop. As for the number of licenses issued, the Pt1, the government has not announced whether the number of school buses have increased. And last time when we had a meeting with the Transport Department, we mentioned that if we use a smaller coach, say a nanny van, you can take 20 students, and if you use a large coach, you can take 60 students. But I think this is just working behind closed doors. You really cannot resolve the problem. And instead of resolving the problem, there will be other regulatory issues. And for nanny vans, taxis, PLBs, in fact, the transportation sector is very unhappy with the arrangement, and I hope the department would reconsider the arrangement. Next, Mr. Brian Wu. I haven't prepared to speak today. I'm sorry. Next, thank you. I represent the Public Omnibus Operators Association. I'm Matthew Wong. As Undersecretary mentioned, that the hot topic is insufficient school buses, and for the increased number of A03R licenses, that is it aims at resolving the problem. However, at the time, in 2004, the sector was requested to look for second-hand coaches to, if we wanted to enhance our service. And now, without consultation, the government has hastily decided to issue more A03R licenses, and the sector feels that it has been treated very unfairly because it has to look for second-hand buses in a short period of time. And for A03R licenses, there is a question on whether using such buses to maintain school bus services would cover costs. And we have been discussing with schools, and I think the major issue is for coach drivers, nanny van drivers, and schools to sit down and discuss and come up with feasible options for bus routes and fees. Now, just now, one of the deputations mentioned that of the 7,000 plus NFBs, 3,000 of them have the A03R endorsement, but we have doubts as to whether all 3,000 of them would all provide school bus service. If A03R endorsements could be given to all 7,000 NFBs, then you can immediately increase the service by the coaches by 3,800, and that would also increase school bus services. And for the requirement, the AR80 installation, then for coaches manufactured before 1990, no, they cannot take school children in the middle row and in the back row, and we can hire these vans to address the shortage problem. And I don't have enough time today. I hope that you could listen to our view. If you increase AO3R, all of a sudden you will see 2,000 or 3,000 more coaches in the street all of a sudden. And with lack of maintenance support, there will be a great blow dealt on the sector. Next, Chairman of the Pt1 District Tourist and Passengers Omnibus Operators Association Limited, Tang Chi Kang. Good morning. I am Chairman of the association mentioned. I'm Tang Chi Kang. The government has decided to issue more AO3R licenses. The sector believes this cannot address the problem. There will be more problems. And on the 4th of March, the department informed the sector, including the PLBs, taxis, GMBs, coaches, etc. And we all reflect the same problem. The daily costs would amount to 50,000, and it's hard to cover the costs, and the situation will be chaotic over the years. The department has not proactively provided information on schools with zero bids, and the sector has taken the initiative to approach these schools, and we've also posted advertisements. Before today, in fact, the sector has liaised with school operators, and we have built a platform to communicate and strive to resolve the problem of insufficient school buses. As we understand, there are 24 schools requiring the help of the sector, 10 of which are already served by school buses. As for the remaining 14, because of the low ridership and the high number of routes required, for some schools they need school buses for 8 to 10 students in each route. As for the other schools, we've also followed up on the problem and provided some information for reference. And we've also tried to help these zero-bid schools, and they should at least provide a passenger load of half of the total capacity. For example, for a 60-seat coach, they should at least have 30 students. And the association would provide subsidy for a 6-month period if the operator cannot recover costs. And there should also be subsidies for school bus services to address the problem. And in fact, the Standing Committee of the Association has already decided to lease 50 school buses for operators' use, and say for a coach of $1.5 million, the leasing fee would be $15,000 per month, for $13,000 per month, and all other expenses would be incurred by would be borne by the operator. And we'll also engage an accountant to come up with the or to prepare the accounts and see if it's possible to reduce fees. And it's hoped that the public and the Transport Department will consider the problems faced by the operators introduced by the Transport Department. Next, Mr. Jack Cheong from Yunnan District Tourists and Passengers Omnibus Operators Association Limited. Chairman, I've prepared a written submission setting out our argument, and that is why I don't intend to speak today. Next, Hong Kong District Tourists and Passengers Omnibus Operators Association Limited, Mr. Chan Chi-Tek. Thank you, Chairman. In March, we received a letter from the Transport Department complaining about zero bid for school bus services for some schools, and that the department would consider issuing more A03R licenses. The association doesn't find it necessary to do so because now it seems that there is demand, but nobody's providing the service. But according to our association's information, in fact, only 15 schools were involved in the zero bid incident, less than 1% of the total number of schools. And these schools do not have sufficient students, and they require long routes, and one coach may only take several students at a time. I hope the Education Bureau and the Transport Department could discuss with our association to resolve the problem. There are around 7,000 such NFBs in Hong Kong at the moment, 3,000 plus of which are providing school bus service, and there are also 2,000 plus nanny vans, and altogether these some 5,000 vans and coaches could serve the students. And in order to address the problem, our association believes that some temporary licenses could be issued to the remaining 3,000 plus NFBs for emergency purposes. Only 30% of students take school buses in Hong Kong nowadays. And with the extra temporary licenses, this should be able to cater for the demand. As for more A03R endorsement, our association believes that insufficient tenderers does not mean that there aren't sufficient coaches or NFBs. In fact, we should communicate more often, because even with more A03R endorsements, there would only be increased competition with taxis, PLBs, etc. As for schools that have not received any bids from tenderers, we hope that they would communicate with us. Next, Tuen Mun District Tourists and Passengers Omnibus Operators Association Limited, Mr. Tek Yip.
Thank you, Chairman, members. I've talked about the application of NFBs to the Transport Department, as well as the application for the endorsement. I'd like to report the latest progress. I think the current service pledge it's really far from what our customers expect. Right now, the processing time is around 8 weeks. So from the time of tendering to the actual operation, it's a very long time. So this is a very big problem for us. And the second issue is the schedule for replacing old vehicles. We have to wait for about 2 weeks in order to get a new vehicle. Since 2004, it has been more than 10 years. So I think there is a need to update our service pledge, and at the same time, we have to be flexible. We should make the best use of our resources. Since the regulations have been in place for 10 years and 7,000 vehicles have been operating smoothly, so should we learn from other countries and introduce some flexibility? If we have to wait for 3 or 4 weeks for every application, it's way too long. For instance, we don't have the 803R endorsement. We have to wait for the endorsement, and we have to wait for everything. As you know, in peak seasons, we have a lot of tourists. A lot of school buses have to make ends meet in June, July, and August. If we want to purchase a new vehicle, we have to wait for 2 months, but by then we have no business anymore. So where's the flexibility? We want to introduce some factory-feeded buses, but you never grant our you never grant the endorsements. We are just trying to launch some feeder buses for factories, and we can only operate a single type of service. But what happens in the summer when there are no students? So I hope the Transport Department can think about this, and I hope all of the members can think about this as well. Next. Kowloon District Tourists and Passengers Omnibus Operators Association Limited, Mr. Cyrus Lai. Most of our members operate sightseeing buses. And for this kind of service, we often take our passengers to sightseeing spots. The issue is that we don't have enough drop-off spots. So very often we have to drop them off at restricted areas at the risk of being caught by the police. And at the same time, our drivers have nowhere to take a break. After dropping off passengers, they are often forced to remain on their buses and go around because they cannot find a place to park their cars or buses. A lot of people don't like these sightseeing coaches because they complain about the number of vehicles in areas like TST. But we really have no option because there's no place for them to park. So this is one issue, and another issue is with the permit. The application procedures are very complicated, and one of our members actually told us that as they applied for the A01 sightseeing permit, well, there's an agency which serves Korean tourists, and the Transport Department asked us to provide an overseas contract. In other words, it's a Korean contract written in Korean. And they said, we don't understand Korean. So it's really ironic. They have asked for the contract, yet they said they couldn't understand it. So does it mean we have to translate the contract for them? So I hope the department can really streamline the application process and give us some venues for dropping off tourists. Winhoi Group Limited, Mr. Ocean Law, the Managing Director. Good morning. The Hong Kong's railway spans more than 218 kilometers, and there are 4.5 million users every day, and a lot of them, the network will be completed from 2018 to 2026. And for franchise, non-franchise buses and minibuses, they do not have enough business. And non-franchise minibuses are having to compete with non-franchise buses. And as Hong Kong continues to perfect its railway network, China is also catching up. And the cross-boundary coaches are seeing less and less business. And a lot of members of the public are influenced by the media and various reports that the non-franchise buses could not survive because there are not enough school buses because all the vehicles are mobilized for tourists. And during low seasons, the car parks are full of vehicles. And the only way out for NFBs is to maximize their utilization. They can serve as feeder buses for office workers as well as students. But under the current system, they are limited to certain types of endorsements, and a lot of buses have only one type of endorsement, and cross-boundary service is getting out of fashion as well. And during the peak seasons, a lot of tourists could not secure coach service, and at the same time, we have a lot of vehicles in car parks. The trade is trying to maximize utilization by obtaining A01, A02, and O3 endorsements in order to secure more business. And then we wouldn't have to worry about B03 and A03R. And you are destroying the market order. And without the licenses, those 7,000 vehicles would have to be face a replacement every year. And with those extra endorsements, the trade expects at least 3,000 new vehicles every year. And only about 10% of them can survive. And the other 6,000 vehicles would have to be sold. And at the end, you are forcing operators to operate illegally. Next, Sunfy Transportation Company, Mr. Cheong Ying-fat. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Cheong Ying-fat from Sunfy Transportation Company. I'd like to talk about school buses, which is one type of NFBs. I'm against the granting of AO3R endorsement. I have operated school bus service for 35 years, and years ago, after a long consultation process between the Electrical Transport Department and TAC, they decided to freeze the number of NFBs. And if you intend to offer service, you have to purchase vehicles from the market. And at that time, we spent 18 millions to purchase 8 NFBs. And all the vehicles were used as school buses. If the government is so lenient with the AO3R endorsement right now, it's unfair to the current market players, including myself. If we are forced to pay up by the bank, our operators would have to suffer, and we are effectively the victims of this policy. At the same time, I'd like to talk about the shortage of school buses. In fact, we are not facing any shortage. I'd like to respond to something a director said, and he talked about the situation of zero tenders and undertakings. And I think schools have to review their tender documents on the number of school buses and routes, when whether or not it creates any difficulties for school bus operators. For instance, I have a tender document right here with me. It has 120 passengers, and they will have 8 routes. So for each route, there are only a dozen or so students. So it's very hard for operators to survive. So to have dedicated buses is probably the only solution. Right now, I operate school buses for more than 10 schools, including kindergartens, primary and secondary schools. And they all face the same problem of inadequate passengers. Under the current licensing policy, which is so coarse and lenient, I think we will have a problem of oversupply, and it will be detrimental to the overall transportation policy. And the operators can hardly adapt, and they are being driven out of business. So at the end, they might be forced to leave the school bus market. And at the same time, we might come back to the scenario of 2004, and we might start seeing illegal operators again. Jackson Coach Hire Services Limited, Mr. Jackson Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to talk about the reasons for the school bus shortage. There's a lack of tenderers, and that's because our education system has changed around 10 years ago, and the hours for the morning and afternoon classes have narrowed, and there is a lack of demand, and coaches can only charge each student once, and hence the operating costs have increased. In recent years, the birth rates have also dropped, and a lot of coaches have to operate across districts, and as such, the number of passengers have dropped. And as some other deputations have mentioned, and the first students who bought the coaches might have to wait for a long time before they can get off. Last week, I received a tender for school bus service for Kowloon School, and the number of passengers is about 120. There are 70 stops, 8 routes, and they would like to offer service with 24 seaters and 61 seaters. And the pickup hours are about 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And the school hours are around 11:30 and 12:30. And during school sports days, the schools must provide free school bus services. So by rough calculations, we only have about 15 students per bus. So there isn't a need for school bus operators. So there is a mismatch of resources, and the school buses cannot achieve a break even. And right now, Hong Kong's transportation system is based on the railway, and the A03 buses cannot make use of the existing resources. And there is a lack of parking spaces, as you all know. And we are also against granting A03R licenses for school buses. And for those who intend to operate school bus services, they should provide dedicated buses, and the use of resources should be maximized. Next, Jubilee International Tour Center Limited, Mr. Johnny Lee, the Managing Director. Thank you, Chairman. I've been operating a tour center for more than 30 years, and 20 or so years ago, I have purchased fleets of vehicles. And at that time, it was easy to do business. You only had to submit the documents and go through the procedures. And that's why at that time, before 2003 or 4, there were a lot of buses. And as such, there were a lot of illegal activities as well. So at that time, the Transport Advisory Committee released a document, a set of guidelines for the trade. Right now, for the tourism trade, the seasons for FIT travelers fluctuate a lot. We also serve tourists from America and Europe, as well as those from Southeast Asia. I'm talking about tour groups. Actually, we are not seeing a lot of tour groups. So the resource allocation for tourist buses is not really satisfactory. Usually, operators would rent out coaches to schools, but the designs of our fleet means that we cannot rent out our buses to schools. But we really want to offer services for them. In particular, we want to help these schools during school holidays, but we are not able to do that. Some deputations mentioned that if the government is more lenient, we can maximize the resources for our coaches. Of course, there's a lack of students, but I'd still like to do some business with schools. We are welcome to the idea to provide more service to schools through some temporary measures. Right now, I think the current practice is satisfactory enough, and you shouldn't introduce even more vehicles, because right now it's very difficult to hire drivers. So I hope the Transport Department can conduct a review on this front. So all I hope for is a better use of resources, because we have a lot of buses lying around. Kwun Chung Bus Holding Limited, Mr. James Wong, the CEO, please. Good morning. Good morning, Chairman. A lot of deputations talked about school bus service and other types of service. I hope the government can pay attention to the non-franchise buses that provide employee services. After 2004, these private buses have had to adhere to the regulations on the acquisition of second-hand vehicles, and they have to acquire buses. Since our railway network is already so comprehensive, even franchise buses find it hard to survive. And a lot of minibuses have to compete with NFBs. I think private buses that offer employee services are also competing with franchise buses. And right now, a lot of these private buses are being operated by companies themselves. So in other words, you are endorsing these buses. So in terms of efficiency, why don't you ask them to go through the tendering process and force them to look at franchise buses first. And another issue is also about employee service.
As NFBs, in fact, they are also part of the public transport system. Right now, well, many of our clients, they are organizations, and they would try to hire buses. So let's not forget that they've already paid the fare for bus hiring, and for various reasons, they might be hiring buses in order to increase the attractiveness of recruitment, because they're providing free transport to their employees. But then very often, for one reason or another, for example, in a particular district, there might already be other modes of public transport. That's why our license might not be approved. But then we are actually providing different types of services, and that's actually employee service offered by the employers. So the employees are not just members of the public taking public transport. So please do bear this in mind. And just now, some members have already said that in terms of vehicle examination, the whole system is very old and outdated. All right. For example, if we try to procure buses from overseas, and the manufacturer told us that they can only provide buses of a width of 2.55 meters, and then for franchise buses, the width is already 2.5. But now they're asking us to have buses of a width of 2.55 meters. Well, actually, why can't this be allowed? Because worldwide, they're using the same width, 2.5 meters, and then when we try to manufacture buses of 2.55, actually the choices would be limited, and the cost would also go up. So please do take note of that. Thank you. Next, JTEC Passenger Transport Limited, Mr. Man Hoi Tek. Well, our company provides residence service, and we are against point-to-point service offered by franchise buses, because if franchise buses were to offer such services, then that would duplicate the service offered by our company, and that would erode our business, and residents would also have one fewer choice. In fact, in terms of franchise buses, there are other buses that can provide point-to-point service, but then the administration has totally ignored the needs of the residents in using public transport. Very often, despite the fact that a majority of the residents might have applied for this service, the administration would use it as an excuse to reject the application, and sometimes these reasons are very unreasonable. And with more point-to-point service and also the seat-only buses to be offered by the franchise buses, I think this is just operating behind black box. We should accept a new resident service to and from the urban area in order to ease the load or the burden on the rail system, and there should also be more resident service, and the frequency should be increased, and there should also be more relaxed approach so the residents can have more choices. Thank you. Next, City Motors, Mr. Howard Tong, Operation Department Senior Manager. I'd also like to talk about school buses. Well, I'm a new blood in the industry, but I'd like to share my experience with you, having worked in a company for several years. Well, very often we would put in bids for school buses, but then very often the requirements would be so stringent that we had to decline the invitation by the schools. Number one, because there are whole day schools, and very often they would also organize interest classes and also extracurricular activities, and very often they would require us to provide school buses to the students participating in such activities, and they would also require such school buses to cover the same area or catchment area as the regular buses. For example, there might have been 5 routes covering 5 districts, but then for after school buses, we would also have to run 5 routes covering the same catchment areas, so that students from those districts can also take part. So we are talking about one route with different services, but then that would double our cost. But then because of pressure from parents, we would not be able to fully reflect the cost from the fare, and schools would also be reluctant to put in additional resources for the school buses from the fees being charged from students for such activities. And very often the parents will also intervene in the arrangement for school buses. For example, if there are different housing estates in a particular district, they would also expect the school buses to go through or to pass by each and every point. And as a result, the alignment would be very convoluted, and very often the same route would be covering the same areas in the same district. And for students from a different district, because they are scattering in different areas, and if we have to make effective use of the buses, inevitably the routes will have to be very convoluted. But then on the one hand, we are required to provide services to students from different districts, and in the actual operation, we will have to finish the route or the journey within specified time. So very often one bus might only carry a few students, and if we are lucky enough, then we will have a dozen or so students on board of the buses. So the difficulty of operation might have caused many operators to cease operation, or they might choose not to put in a bid, or they would just withdraw from the business altogether. And instead, many buses running 16-seater buses would continue to operate. So if these problems are not resolved, then that would not make the business viable, and as a result, a small number of schools might not be able to get an operator running the school bus service. In other words, we will have to resolve the problems of short supply of school buses. Well, by just issuing licenses is not going to solve the problem, so you will have to look into this. Thank you. Next, Hapsheng Tour Bus Passenger Service Company, Mr. Yip Wing Cheng. Thank you. Today we are discussing the issue of shortage of school buses. I'm of the view that the relevant department will have to take up the whole responsibility for this, and the reason is that its policy has been changing all the time, and they've been adopting a symptomatic approach. They have not been able to resolve the problem at its root, and this is a livelihood issue. And I think the administration will have to be involved in the discussion of the issue. So do we have to go to Beijing in order to get the problems resolved? It's not that I'm not concerned about students not getting school buses providing service to them, but then we will have to find out the reason why. Why are they not able to find school buses? Well, some deputations have touched on that already, but then I'm sure for speakers after me, they will also be giving very good suggestions to the administration. I think the kids or the children are the future masters of our society, and therefore we will have to provide more training to them. We will have to nurture them. I think that's the thrust of the whole matter. The administration and the relevant parties will have to work together to solve the problems. And by that, I mean the Transport Department and the Commissioner for Transport. And second is the Bureau Director of the Transport and Housing Bureau. And I would call them both a very good couple, because they are the two heavyweights responsible for the policy, but then they simply do not have enough time to consult the sector or the trade. So they just hastily decided on such critical issues without listening to the feedback from the trade. In fact, we have very strong views about this, and also the transport sector is not just my sector. In fact, majority of those from the transport sector have given them very strong views, but then they have chosen to turn a deaf ear to that, and instead they just listen to the stupid people's views. And as a result, starting from September 2015, they are going to introduce some A03R endorsement to these licenses. This is just this is really something. This is a freak. So why do we have to have such endorsement? That's why I said that the policy is not right, and you're trying to resolve the problems by adopting a band-aid approach. And they are asking us to try it out. But then there are things that cannot be tried out. What if it's a failure? All right, we have to spend more than $1 million in procuring a bus. So buying a coach bus is not like buying a private car. The procedures are very complicated. So I think on this occasion, the Transport Department has misled us. It has asked us to give it a try. Well, if you're not sure, don't give it a try, or else you'll fail. And today, if the relevant parties insist on rolling this out, that is introducing this A03R endorsement, if you insist on doing that, then for the users, the sector, and the public, you're actually antagonizing all of them, and all sides will lose. So please do not do that. Please try to do a good job, so that for our future masters of society, you would be serving them well. Next, Cheong Transportation Limited, Mr. Derek Cheong. Good morning, everyone. Well, today I'd like to focus on the issue of parking, because if you look at government's infrastructure and also the housing problem, as a result of that, the government has resumed many car parks, and as a result, for heavy vehicles, they have difficulty finding a space to park. So I hope that the administration can provide more land, and it should also open up more sections of the road so that during non-busy hours, heavy vehicles can be allowed to park there. I hope that the administration can follow up on this. Thank you so much for my remarks. All right, next. Natural Express owner, Mr. Chong Peng-Wah. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to ask the Transport Department, in applying for this new endorsement 803R, how many more buses will have to be procured? All right, we have already got 7,000 coach buses, and parking is a serious problem. And the government and the developers are trying their best to develop properties, and as a result, both in the urban area and in the new territories, we do not have anywhere to park, and as a result, we are forced to park on roadside, despite the fact that we might be issued tickets. So it's a very serious problem. We also have a shortage of manpower repairing and maintaining vehicles, and if a garageman retires, then there is one fewer, and there is no new blood joining the trade, and sometimes these garages have to be relocated to the new territories or in remote areas, and in the new territories they are also having this problem of many sites being resumed. And for heavy vehicles, in the past it used to take just a couple of days for the vehicle to be repaired, and now it would take a lot longer, and that would also affect our livelihood. And also for the Pt1 Vehicle Examination Center, it will have to cope with an excessive heavy workload, and that would also affect the standard of examination. Today, the Transport Department, if it's to issue an A03R license without any restriction, so it's like the individual visit scheme with the multiple entry visa scheme, that would only cause more congestion on the roads, and buses will have nowhere to park, and there will be no one doing the repair, and there is no way that you can complete the examination. You will not be able to recruit drivers or nannies, and as a result, we may have to have one visit per week, because the buses have arrived and they are already running on the roads. So we hope that the Transport Department will withdraw this policy, or else there will be very dire consequences. Thank you. Next. Typhoon Coach Company Limited, Mr. Peter Mock. Thank you, Chairman, for the A03R unlimited license. That would open a can of worms. So you can then have A04, and then there will be pressure for the issue of more licenses. And if that is the case, then that would just cause chaos to the market order. Well, the whole policy started in 1996. The Transport Department submitted a report saying that railway would be the backbone of our public transport system, and then for the other modes of transport, they would just play complementary roles, including public light buses, taxis, and so on. But then, unfortunately, there was no coordination amongst the various modes of transport, and as a result, there was a waste of resources. 1997 saw the Asian financial turmoil, and as a result, there was very unhealthy competition amongst the various sectors, and as a result, the TAC in 2003 conducted a round of consultation, and then in 2004 there was a very targeted report against NFBs, and the guidelines set out in the report resulted in NFBs being put on the right track for development. And now we have to conduct a review. And if that is the case, the review should be a comprehensive review instead of a review on the NFB service. If it's not comprehensive, then it would be like introducing a O3R, and after the gap is open, then the whole thing will have to be put back to the TAC, and then this council will have to scrutinize the policy again. And as a reminder, I referred to a report just now. It was also scrutinized by this council very stringently, and then in 2004 it was passed on to the Transport Department for implementation, and there were different packages in the report which were coordinated between the administration and the sector, and as a result it managed to resolve many existing problems. And if there is another difference in opinions, that would cause a lot of problems to our future operation. First of all, we are from the services industry, and in terms of the time, so it's an industry which will survive on the basis of the time and also the space. For example, if you have a ticket going to a 5:30 show, then you would not be able to go to a show that would start at 7:30. In other words, after the busy hours, we won't have any income and we won't be able to make a living. And if there is a mismatch in the supply and demand, then that would result in a mismatch in the service. So in the end, it would not just be the sector which will suffer, the public would also suffer. Please do pay attention to that. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chen Wai-ming from the Sunstar Taxi Operators Association. Thank you. On the 6th of March, the taxi trade and the minibus sector had a meeting with the Transport Department. Unanimously, we were against the administration's intention to introduce this A03R student school bus. Well, when we go out, in every housing estate, in every quarter, you have minibuses, you have the LRT, and also the MTR going to different destinations. So why do you have to issue this A03-hour school bus license? And for the existing 3,000 plus A03 resident bus, which can also be turned into school buses. So out of the 3,000 school bus, out of the 3,000 residence buses, well, in fact, there are buses available. So why do you have to issue new licenses? So out of the 3,000 buses that can be used as school buses, why have you not turned to them? That's why on the 6th of March, the minibus sector and the taxi sector unanimously said that they were against it. All right, you're closing down schools, so there will be fewer students. So why do you have to introduce this A03R license? Is that a freak? So we are absolutely against it. We also urge the Bureau Director to give the taxi sector or the taxi trade a room for survival. All right, you've just come in. Next, Mr. Lee Chun-hei from Civic Party. Yes, I'm from Civic Party. With regard to the PTSS and also NFB service, we have the following comments. Number one, for NFB, they do not have enough space to pick up and drop off passengers, and there was a drop by some 200 in the past couple of years. And for AO4, well, it dropped from 2,500 to 1,700. But then these are employee services, in particular for residents living in the remote areas or without public transport support. And for example, for the container terminal, which is a closer station to the urban area, there are also some employee buses taking employees to and from work. But then in Mayfu, we do not have a parking facility for NFBs, and during the busy hours, many buses will have to park on Meilai Road, Lai Wan Road, and they will have to pick up passengers there. And the waiting environment for the passengers is not good, and that would also take up one lane of the traffic, and that would cause congestion, in particular near the flyover in Kwai Chong Container Terminal. Well, right next to it, there was a minibus stop, and when they are picking up and dropping off passengers, that would cause a lot of problems. Well, when the West Rail station is to be built, have you considered allowing for some space for NFBs to pick up and drop off passengers to and from work? And also, with the shortage of parking space for NFBs, during the past years, there has been a lot of development in the tourism sector, and the number of coach buses went up from 2,500 to 3,150.
So there's a shortage of parking spaces for tourist coaches. Now, one of the black spots is Kowloon West and Tsim Sha Tsui. And according to a joint survey conducted in 2013, altogether there were only 33 metered parking spaces for coaches. But every day, 250 coaches travel to and from Tsim Sha Tsui, and very often we see the situation of double parking. Because of insufficient parking spaces, drivers have to park illegally in neighboring streets like Chatham Road, and drivers had to answer the nature's call with plastic bottles inside their coaches, and this is far from satisfactory. So we believe the Transport Department should pay attention to the demand for loading and loading points for coaches, and there should also be more parking spaces for tourist coaches. And without affecting safety and operation, a fixed number of spaces should be allowed at the PTIs for overnight parking by coaches to address the shortage problem. All right, the deputations attending the meeting have spoken. I will now invite Undersecretary to respond to the views. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for attending the public hearing. And from what I heard just now, let me make a summary. I think the majority view today comes from the sector, including resident service bus operators, school buses, coaches. And these operators have come to explain their difficulties and their constraints as far as their operations are concerned. And it is believed that the government should conduct a timely review on the relevant policy. And deputations have also spoken on the procedure for application for endorsements, and they believe that there is room for reconsidering the policy or streamlining the policy. For example, on the performance pledge and the time required for processing the applications, and also for regulatory standards for vehicle specifications. There are views that there is room for improvement, and I've also heard comments on insufficient load-in and loading area and parking spaces in popular tourist districts, and that the government should do more in this regard. And there are also comments that as far as illegal operation is concerned, the government should step up its effort. And some also talked about the difficulties of drivers in the daily operation. And I think another majority view is on school buses, in particular in relation to A03R endorsements, and that the restrictions will be relaxed, and they have made their views during the consultation process. In fact, before today's meeting, as I understand, they have been explaining in great detail to schools their difficulties in terms of the operation and costs, and the sector, as I heard today, also admits that we must address the demand for school bus services. However, they've also pointed out that the problem is experienced by a small number of schools only, and without imposing any cap on the number of A03R endorsements, there will be a great impact on the sector. But I'm also happy to hear that they have started a dialogue with schools, and they've also set up a working group. And just now I also heard that they actually held a meeting yesterday. I believe that when school semester starts in September, we should be able to address the issue of insufficient school buses or high fares charged by school buses. And for the comments and views reflected, it's conducive to helping us formulate the next report on the comprehensive transport study, or the PTSS, and I believe that in the coming Friday the panel will have a more detailed discussion on school buses, and I think your comments would serve a very good reference for them. And I'd like to also point out that today, although we don't have many deputations representing schools, we have received written submissions from the schools, from the education sector. And in fact, they support the Transport Department's latest policy. And I think we will consider all the views and follow up on them comprehensively. Well, Under Secretary, I asked you to respond to the individual views from deputations, but in fact you've prepared a very good executive summary. So I will allow members to ask follow-up questions and to play their part. Four just arrived, but the meeting started at 9. Let's wait for the next session. We have Tan Ka Pil, Chen Kam Lam, Frankie Yik, Albert Chan, Wong Kwok Heng, and myself, altogether 6 members, waiting to ask questions. No problem. Miss Claudia Mo as well. You can go before me. Altogether, how many members? 7. So 4 minutes each. Mr. Tan Ka Pil. Thank you, Chairman. Well, of course, today the topic is non-franchise buses, and there are different kinds of operations and difficulties. And of course, our concern is on school bus service. And of course, we're concerned about schools which find it difficult to look for school buses, and also school buses that are charging high fares. At the same time, we're also concerned that the government might be rolling out hastily policies that may actually disrupt the market, and the situation may become chaotic, and some small operators may close down. So there must be market demand, actual market demand, and I thank the deputations for their comments, and I believe that they have truly reflected the picture. With insufficient intake in schools, definitely school bus operators will find it hard to have sufficient ridership. And in particular, the schools cannot compel students to use school bus service. Even if they do so, they cannot compel students to use school buses during school holidays. And I understand the cost implications for operators are significant. I think apart from the THP and the Transport Department, we should also have invited the Education Bureau. Although this today we are having a public hearing on Friday, we have another meeting on this issue. And I think they should send representatives, otherwise the discussion would be futile. Well, as I heard what you said just now, it's been 6 months. And you have made certain undertakings, for example, to guarantee a certain number of buses, and there'll be resources coming from the association. What about after 6 months? For NFB, Public Buses Association, I have read some statistics, and there are also statistics on nanny vans. For example, if the monthly cost for a nanny van is about $30,000, then as the government checked whether the figure is correct, or is there any policy to support students? Otherwise, it's pointless to open the market. If it's not profitable, then there won't be any operator. If, say, schools are scattered across the territory and there aren't enough students taking school buses, then you can't address the problem. Well, Deputy Chairman, would you like the government to respond? Yes, please try to give some support instead of disrupting the market. And go. 30 seconds on the Secretary. Now, as far as support is concerned, in fact, the Education Bureau does provide transport subsidy to students from needy families. And I believe, of course, there are criteria to be met, and as well as direct subsidies to be given to school buses or NFBs, I believe this is not really within the ambit of education. Next, Mr. Chan Kam Lam. I thank the deputations representing the sector for expressing their views today at the public hearing. From what I heard just now, the situation is quite serious. We have quite a large number of cross-boundary students coming to Hong Kong for schooling today, and these students cannot rely on public buses. They have to rely on school buses. And I understand some schools would like to run their own school buses instead. But they have to understand that even if they do so, the fares may not be lower than what they are currently charged. So my question is this. Has the government sought an understanding on this? That is, if they run their own school bus service, would the cost be lower than that of the existing operator? And has the government tried to understand why high fares are being charged? Are they trying to reap a huge profit? Or has it to do with high costs? And if the operators provide school bus service, they will be sacrificing other markets. So I think market adjustment is important. If we always rely on government policies to adjust the market, then we might see extreme situations. Schools may have their own school buses, but then the school buses would also be charging very costly. And what about large operators? They may not have the incentive to run school bus service. So we don't want to see the situation polarized. The government should act as the coordinator and the middleman to understand the difficulties facing the two different parties before rolling out policies. So with few tenderers, you understand that the policy is not really popular. And I think the government should try to coordinate things instead of letting schools making complaints and allowing operators to continue to be disincentivized, because the parents are also facing this problem. Under Secretary. Well, Mr. Chan mentioned something about the school bus service. And our stance is that we should let the market itself address the demand. So in terms of bus routes and fares and the mode of operation, we believe that they should be based on students' needs and the sector's cooperation. We believe that this is the best approach. The government intervention may not be necessary. However, where there is an imbalance in the market in terms of demand and supply, and where members have asked a number of times for government intervention, then we may find it necessary to intervene. Next, Mr. Frankie Yik. Well, today's topic is about the PTSS. I think we should look at the problem facing the whole sector. Now, some deputations mentioned the parking issue, and I have raised this issue time and again in the Council. Insufficient drivers, insufficient maintenance staff, because of inability to attract new blood to the industry, and insufficient parking space for coaches in tourist spots. All these issues are relevant. But under Secretary, you can see that today the majority of comments received is that you should not issue more AO3R endorsements, or the situation will become chaotic. In fact, we had a number of meetings, and I also took part in some of them. And in fact, there are only 10 schools or so out of the several hundred schools in Hong Kong encountering this problem. And we also understand that it's really difficult or impossible for operators to submit bids according to those standard documents. So it's really pointless to issue more endorsements. What about non-peak seasons during summer holiday? What would these coaches be doing? They would be left to operate illegally. And the police would say that their job is not to combat illegal coach operation, just like they say they are not tasked to combat illegal or taxi operations. So the problem actually lies with insufficient school children instead of coaches. You can issue more licenses instead of just the AO3R endorsements. So you should really communicate fully with the sector. And Mr. Tan Kapil just now made a very good point. This is a structural problem. Insufficient school intake, and there are also students traveling to another district for schooling. As for parents with financial difficulties, well, they are assisted by the CSSA. But what about others? For example, ferry services for outlying islands. Well, it's a necessary service for residents there, and government subsidy is necessary because it's not profitable, and the problem should be addressed by providing government subsidy. And I agree with Mr. Tan Kapil that we could not just rely on the Transport Department alone, and the Education Bureau should also take part in the process. For example, we can have contract hire service. Well, if financially this is not viable, what about allowing flexible school hours so that school buses can serve a number of routes a day, and maybe several schools can join and use the same bus service route. Now, in fact, I already heard that some schools have carpooling arrangement, and there are some schools which reject this idea very subjectively. And Under Secretary, you need not answer me today. We can carry on a discussion on Friday. But you can see the views of the sector. Today, we should be discussing the overall policy matters and the PTSS.
Mr. Albert Chan. Thank you, Chairman. On the issue of NFBs, every now and then there are controversies. 6 or 7 years ago, we had a big discussion, and in response, the government drew up a set of guidelines, and the controversies died down for a while. But as you can see, the conflicts between the users and suppliers would resurface again every now and then with changes in the market. As tourism dies down, the vehicles will turn to other venues. And so this is something to do with the variety of vehicles as well as the demand of the general public. Some services are very seasonal, some are time sensitive, and some types of service would fluctuate according to the economy. With changes in the market, different types of licenses would change as well. So the real question is, what kind of impacts would these changes have on the users? Now we are talking about school children. As Mr. Frankie Yik said, if the administration can tackle this riddle, then the issue can be resolved. But does this issue have something to do with conflicts in the current policy? Some operators can operate multiple licenses. So from a business point of view, the operators would turn to the most profitable services. I'm quite familiar with this trade, and some operators make a lot of profit, some can hardly make ends meet. So in terms of policy, how can you ensure a fair playing ground? On one hand, you have to ensure survival for the trade, and on the other hand, you must ensure reliable services for the users. Should you introduce dedicated vehicles and dedicated licenses, or should you designate only one type of license for each type of vehicle? In the past, you only had to purchase vehicles. You don't have to purchase licenses. But then there had been a lot of reselling activities, and now the licenses are very expensive. So right now, the licenses are very valuable. So what the government has to review, especially on school buses, is that whether the dedicated vehicle and dedicated service system is reasonable. If schools have to compete with tourists, from the operator's perspective, in peak tourist seasons, they would certainly choose to serve tourists instead of school children. So I think the trade also has to conduct a review. From an operator's point of view, of course, the more licenses you have, the better. But from the THB's point of view, providing dedicated service on dedicated vehicles might be more reasonable. You have to do some calculations, and you also have to listen to the trade. And the most important thing is to provide reliable services at reasonable prices to the users. Next, Mr. Wong Kwok Heng. Thank you, Chairman. A lot of friends from the trade talked about school children service, so I don't want to repeat what they've already said. We will have a review this Friday. I'd like to talk about the study on public buses instead. As you all know, the railway system is a mass transport system, and franchise buses are also bound by a legal framework to provide services in fixed routes. And other non-public franchise buses, I've read your submissions and heard your views. I think there are 4 major issues the government has to look at. First, It's about the types of licenses granted to NFBs. And the types of licenses should facilitate business and meet market demands at the same time. School children's service is only one of the issues we are facing, and generally speaking, when we talk about licenses for NFBs, as you know, we have eight types of NFBs and 4 types of private vehicles. So we might have to streamline these license types in order to meet market demands. So that's the first issue. Second, I think most people would agree that there is a need for urban planning for pickup and drop-off points. Since we have a lot of sightseeing spots, we do not have enough pickup and drop-off spots, which leads to congestion and road use issues. So this is an issue which must be tackled by the THB as well as the planning department. And the third issue, and it's also a problem a lot of public members have complained about, it's the number of parking lots in the daytime and at night. We've been talking about this problem for a long time, but what has the government done? As a lot of people said, there's no place to park, so they can only park their vehicles on the streets, and they won't have time for lunch. And so this is something the government has to look at. And the final issue, in car testing centers, well, the fourth issue is on the support in terms of maintenance and car checking. We have a lack of manpower and talents and a lack of services. So these are the 4 issues the government has to conduct more research and studies, and a specific assessment must be conducted, and they have to come up with solutions. And as such, they can improve NFB services and tackle the core of the problem. So I hope the government can conduct comprehensive assessments on these issues. Ms. Claudia Mo. In terms of policy, the government is heavily executive-led, and when they don't want to do something, they would throw the ball back to the trade, and at the end of the day, they have not solved the problem. And we have so many representatives from the trade here this morning, and they have told you their concerns very clearly, but in your response, it's very unclear and ambiguous. You are trying to respond to their concerns in one breath, and in particular, for the AO3R endorsement, some deputations have expressed grave concerns, so at least you must make a basic commitment. Of course, you cannot address them one by one, but please at least be more sincere. Can you tell us a little bit more? If you ask the deputations here this morning, do you think the government really addressed your concerns? The answer is probably no. And in Tsim Sha Tsui, there's a big problem with parking lots for tourist coaches. If you drive by Chatham Road, the situation is very bad, but you cannot blame the coach drivers. There are only 33 metered parking lots, but there are over 200 tourist coaches. So what do you expect them to do? This problem has existed for 7 years. and the car park in Middle Road was demolished. And so what has the Transport Department done? I just want to pinpoint the situation at Tsim Sha Tsui. Undersecretary, please, can you address this question? I know that Ms. Mo has a stance on the number of inbound tourists to Hong Kong. The increase in number of tourists would lead to greater demands, in particular on transportation in popular tourist spots, including but not limited to TST. There is a shortage of parking spaces and drop-off points. So this point has been mentioned by many deputations. In urban areas, it's difficult to maximize the use of parking lots. Even in places like Repulse Bay, it's not easy. Chairman, why is he talking about Repulse Bay? I didn't talk about Repulse Bay. How do you solve the problem of parking in Tsim Sha Tsui? Can you be more focused? We will work on several fronts. In Tsim Sha Tsui, in the limited spaces, we would try to allocate areas for coaches. For example, can you give us some examples? So perhaps our colleagues at the Transport Department can address your question. You only have 15 seconds left. Thank you, Chairman. We have similar observations on the TST district. There is indeed a lack of shortage for parking spaces. So we will try to identify possible parking sites, and we are happy to liaise with the trade. And next, it's myself. Undersecretary, I have a simple question. You have heard our views today, and you understand that there's a problem, there's a shortage problem, and if you open up licenses for school children service, I think most people agree that as long as the operators, if the operators don't operate other types of services, they can hardly survive. So so do you agree with such view? Chairman, I think the point you mentioned is something we are indeed thinking about. If we grant AO3R endorsements, if we don't grant this type of endorsement, they cannot survive. If they cannot survive, then there would be no impacts on the market. If we see illegal operators, we have to crack down on them. And our law enforcement officers would certainly take action if cases are reported. That's one thing for sure. I just want to get things straight. If you agree that operators cannot just provide school service, so in a way, it's rather, the tendering is rather redundant. And if someone does submit tenders, and well, on the other hand, if you believe that they would, some operators would operate illegally, you would take legal action. So I'm a bit confused. Unless you believe that operators cannot just provide school service, well, that's my question. The cost every month is more than $50,000, and there are 8 routes. So I'm referring to the schools facing the shortages. So I just want to know what you think. According to our figures, some operators only have AO3 licenses. So in other words, they can still survive. And in terms of the total market demand or capacity, no one can say for sure. But as long as there is demand in the market, well, can you just address my question? So you believe that they can survive, right? Statistically speaking, we see that some operators who only have the AO3 license can still survive. And Mr. Yip talked about speeding up the granting of the license, and Mr. Wong talked about the this disparity in the licensing terms. So can you promise to follow up on these points? Can you specifically promise to follow up on these? Some members, for instance, Mr. Wong mentioned the 4 major issues. So my question is that would you promise to follow up on these items? We will do it during the roles and positioning review. I'm not talking about the review. Are you going to follow up on these issues? In RPR, we will look at the supply and demand. Speeding up the granting of endorsements has nothing to do with RPR. Well, they're both something to do with supply and demand. And we can only see results after the RPR is finished. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. We just sought funding from LegCo on public transport studies, and one of them is about non-public franchise buses. And we haven't completed that study, and now we are talking about the AO3 licenses. So I assume that you already have ample information on hand, since you have decided to look at the AO3 license before the results of that report is announced. Some deputations mentioned the distribution of students, which is a core problem. So can you tell us more about the distribution of students and why it has led to difficulties for operators? After the new AO3R licenses are granted, you said the shortage of school service buses can be relieved. But even with this enforcement, operators still have to face the issue of student distribution. So do you have any new ideas of solutions for these operators? And some deputations said that as long as schools can guarantee half the number of students, the operators can survive. And since there's a grave shortage of school buses, well, just like the ferries, can the government have a policy to provide subsidies to the operators? That might be a better solution than introducing new licenses before the current study is wrapped up. And for NFBs, it's an issue of the government. In the past, there were no licensing restrictions, and there used to be no speculation, but now there is a lot of speculation. Well, the situation is the same as taxi licenses. After a cap was imposed, the entire market was twisted. So what do you go from here? So whether or not you will open up the market altogether is another issue, and it's open for discussion. And you have to let us know whether the issues in the market can be resolved by opening up the market. And finally, can you explain for operators without the 803R endorsement, why are you providing service? Of the 7,000 vehicles, about 3,000 have no school bus endorsement.
So why can you not allow them to get the endorsement instead of introducing this new system? Well, many questions have been raised by Mr. Wu, so that might require more data, for example, distribution of students and also government's policy and so on. So I'll have to get back later. So why can you not issue more 803R endorsement? Well, to respond to the schools and also some members' concerns. Well, for franchise bus companies or operators, they may have different licenses, and they may not be operating routes or services that might not yield that much profit. And that's why it's better to have a dedicated license for dedicated purposes. And according to the trade, well, this might render them non-viable. But then according to our data, we can see that there are operators who manage to make a viable business out of the dedicated license system. So for the several thousand without the A003R, all right, there are some 7,000 coach buses right now, and only 3,000 have this endorsement. Well, there are some 7,000 plus NFBs, and some 3,000 have the A03 endorsement, and since 2003 we have already relaxed the requirement, and if operators are able to get the contract from the schools, and if they need a particular number of school buses, so the entire fleet can be given this A03 endorsement, so long as the vehicles for A03 will meet the safety standards. Because as you understand, if you carry students, you will have to have high seats, and that would be the requirement. And that's why since 2006, after the introduction of this measure, over 400 vehicles have been given this endorsement. But then, and regrettably, when we look at these figures for the 400 additional buses, there was also a wastage, and not all of them have been deployed for school bus purposes. That's why there was a drop in the number of A03 endorsement or vehicles with A03 endorsement. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok, well, whether it's school buses, resident buses, or whatever, yes, in terms of their operation, they have different problems. But then I think there is one common point amongst all these different types of vehicles, as mentioned by some members. Well, they all share this problem of parking problem. So in the course of their operation, they do not have a space to park, and they do not have enough space for picking up and dropping off passengers. And also, other than operations, well, during nighttime when they are not operating, they also need to find a space to park. And this has been a problem bothering the NFB operators, drivers, and that has also affected the daily life of many residents. As many deputations have pointed out, in some cases, the operators might require the drivers to find a space for the vehicle to park. So in the new territories, Kowloon and Hong Kong, during nighttime, you can see that at different locations there are many NFBs being parked. So this is really very sad, because they have nowhere to park, and as a result, they rather risk getting a fixed penalty ticket. And well, for direct bus from Sha Tin Town Hall, all right, they are very congested, and in Mong Kok, Sayang Choi Street, and if it's a minibus in Mong Kok, Jordan, well, you can see them. And for school buses during busy hours when they pick up and drop off students, the school buses are finding it difficult to find a place to park, and that has also affected other road users. I'm sure the operators and the drivers never wanted this to happen. So you should know that for planning and infrastructure development, that's not within your purview. But then after all, you are one government. You are from the SAR government, and therefore the THB and the Development Bureau should really talk to each other. You should not just resolve the pressing problem. You should also look at the long term. There are several developments, including some PTI, public transport interchange. Well, when they came to our panel, members on the one hand felt that such PTI projects should be supported, but then how come they are not making very good use of the superstructure or the superstructure of such PTIs? So there is this doubt about whether or not there is any coordination amongst various bureaus within the government. So there are problems that you would like to resolve, but then there are some objective difficulties. But precisely because of that, we have to be forward-looking, we have to be visionary, we have to have very good coordination. And if there are new districts to be developed, then why have you not thought about parking spaces and support facilities? So this is, of course, not directly the subject under discussion today because we're talking about the NFBs. But then there are other vehicles, including container trucks, which are finding it difficult to park. So you will have to do a bit more. And if you're not making good use of such opportunities, then it's really very sad. All right, last one. Mr. James Toh. Well, Chairman, I'd like to put this directly to the administration. There are only two alternatives. One, to meet the demand for school buses. Second, to issue dedicated license for school buses, or to allow NFBs to get a comprehensive license so that there would be more buses available in the market, and then some of them would be willing to provide student bus service. So what is your initial thinking? Chairman, concerning the question raised by Mr. Toh, in fact, within the Transport Department, under our recommendation, there are two parts to that. Well, the first part involves allowing the schools themselves to directly run such school bus service, so they do not have to procure such buses in the market. So we can give them extra endorsement so that schools will be allowed to run such service directly. But then the market has not raised any objection to that. In other words, they find it agreeable. But then what they think is that with regard to NFBs, if we were to issue such a 803R endorsement for buses to carry students, and in their view, that would deal a blow to the market. And even if that endorsement is issued, it's not going to be viable because the market circumstances are that they would not find it viable. But then, on the other hand, when we try to gauge the views of the school sector, well, during the past few years, they said that at the start of the school term, they had this problem of shortage of school buses. And given that, members have also raised this, and they've also pointed out that the government should adopt a more targeted approach by issuing dedicated licenses for other operators so that there can be an increased supply of school buses so that at the start of the school term, such problem can be resolved. That's why the Transport Department, in the light of this, has conducted one round of consultation with the trade. And according to the feedback, apparently, concerning the latter approach, the trade has a lot of concerns and worries. But then we also have to point out that, well, the school's needs and students' needs will have to be met. That is a problem that we will have to resolve. That's why, starting, in the end of March, we organized a meeting so that the schools and also the operators sat down to sort out the problems. And from the feedback from the trade just now, they pointed out that, there was a problem. But then apparently that's not a very serious problem. And they promised that they would attempt to talk to the schools directly in order to see if there is a solution which will meet the needs of both sides. Well, our view is this. As I said just now, as far as the NFBs are concerned, we believe that if the whole problem can be resolved by the market alone, then the government does not have to intervene. But then if the market is not functioning properly, then if there is a mismatch of supply and demand, then the administration will have to interfere. That's why at this point in time, I do not rule out the possibility of the government barging in, because we cannot see that the problem can be totally resolved. And therefore, through this specific work and the working group, we hope that the working group will be able to look at the problems and resolve the problem by September. So how much time do you allow the sectors concerned to sort out the problems? All right, they just had a meeting yesterday, and just now at the public hearing, some representatives from the trade have also reflected that views. And within the Transport Department, some colleagues have also taken part in that meeting. But then how long are you going to give them? How much time are you going to give them? All right, what we are facing is the September school term. That's why we have to give sufficient time to the schools and the sector to prepare for that. So at this point in time, I'm not going to set a deadline, but then they know that time is pressing. Well, Chairman, I hope that before the start of the school term, there should be sufficient time to resolve the problem. And if the problems cannot be resolved on their own, then the administration will have to take resolute action. All right, they know it. We have already overrun by 10 minutes. So I declare that the first session has ended, so we'll have a break, and then we'll have to be back by 11:20.